It's an honor for me to introduce Professor Joanna Zylinska. Joanna Zylinska is a writer, is an artist, is a professor of media, philosophy, critical digital practice at King's College London. She authored a number of books on philosophy, technology, and media. And I want to start by mentioning The End of the Man, a feminist counter-apocalypse, as the Italian audience have the chance to have it translated in Italian, La fine dell'uomo, una contrapocalisse femminista. Among other recent books, I want to mention AI, Art, Machine Vision, and Warped Dreams, 2020, and Minimal Ethics for Anthropocene, 2014. But I'm also very pleased to mention Life After New Media, Mediation as a Vital Process, a book that I was fortunate enough to encounter during my PhD, and which has been a vital part of the debate on contemporary reflection about subjectivities and technology. Having had the opportunity to exchange conversation with her for this conference during the last month makes me say that it's also a great pleasure to work with her. And our conversation felt easy in the sense of being non-hierarchical and horizontal. Her research has been and is certainly an inspiration to many of us here in this Aula Magna. The richness of her work, from writing to more speculative and collaborative projects, are practices involving experimenting with different kinds of image-based media, intervenes in and inspires reflection and action in numerous and diverse fields and disciplines. As feminist media and digital scholars, her work enabling us to intervene in discourses on media and mediation central to other debates such as ethics, crisis, and life itself. Her current research on human perception and machine vision, on the relation between human and machine intelligence, on media art and alternative future is innovative and inspiring. Her work interrogates the very foundation of the way in which imaginaries produced around technologies co-participate in the production of different ideas of the future. As such, it also allows us to redefine what counts as social change from liminal spaces, thus challenging linearity and acknowledging precarity and vulnerability for alternative ideas of the future. Her work also invites us to redefine the human-on-human experience as a whole. So, thank you again for being here, Professor Zylinska. Yours is the floor.
Thank you, Arianna, for such a generous introduction and for this wonderful invitation, and to yourself and Sveva and the colleagues and the technical team for putting together this amazing event. I'm really delighted, well, to be back in the kind of feminist crowd again, to be talking, to be with other bodies and not just kind of screens and minds. So, and also thank you to my kind of intellectual creative sister, Gabriela Galati, the translator of La fine dell'uomo. Well, just received my paper copy, so I'm very touched. Okay, so my presentation will be more a performance than a talk. It will demonstrate my method of engaging with planetary level concerns about our human positioning within the world's ecologies. This method responds to a situation when our very existence is being challenged by the uncertainty of what comes next. A climate collapse, cross-species extinction, another pandemic, a third world war, death by AI, or maybe a sunnier tomorrow for all of us, developed at the nexus of broken dreams and collapsed infrastructures. My mode of dealing with these issues combines feminist philosophy with critical media practice to offer a series of cultural techniques for working through the multiple crises we are currently facing.
The belief in seemingly interminable growth has led to depletion, scarcity, and the crisis of biological and social life. This apocalyptic state of events has been called the Anthropocene. Stretching back at least 250 years to the early days of fossil fuel excavation and burning, the Anthropocene can't be seen and hence known by us contemporary humans because of the vastness of time across which it has unfolded. It can only be visualized, singularly yet repeatedly. Such visualizations usually draw on apocalyptic tropes straight from the Book of Revelation. Images of the blackening of the sun, of heaven falling onto the earth, of lands being moved out of their places. Yet they only show us what we are capable of seeing, while hiding the most dramatic message of the Anthropocene, the end of man and everything else. No picture can convey the fact that soon there will be nothing to see, and no one to see it. Current Anthropocene visuality ultimately has a mollifying effect. We are thus slowly being appeased into accepting.
Okay, so how do we deal with this message of there seemingly being no future? My way of approaching this problem is through adopting the position of a feminist eco-punk, a term that encapsulates the multiple crises of the present moment unfolding on an economic and ecological plane. Departing from the traditional philosophical method of avoiding the present, doubting the example, and remaining suspicious about praxis, my media thinking is also a form of media making, and through this, of world making. The feminist eco-punk I offer is not an aesthetic stand. It's first and foremost an ethical position on how to live in a media-dirty world. The echolalia-sounding concept of eco-punk riffs on variations of the science fiction genre that merge punk's irreverent aesthetic with a creative mobilization of cancelled futurity, while providing it with a relevant cultural imprint. From the original punk, feminist eco-punk inherits an adversarial relationship to consensus reality. From cyberpunk, it borrows a gritty, dystopian view of the techno-future in which one gets by making do. But eco-punk embraces the irreverent and self-sustaining spirit of punk, but also reworks cyberpunk's sense of general alienation, which was very much, as we know from the work of subcultural theorists, a kind of white male alienation, without really kind of countering with other forms of exclusion, of not being part. So I'm kind of trying to work through those forms of exclusion in punk, and from eco-punk, reworking them into a form of active and creative engagement with the world's decaying systems and infrastructures. In foregrounding the intertwined aspects of unfolding ecological and economic disasters, eco-punk deromanticizes the decay, while giving the situation a political twist. It also multiplies punk's agency beyond the heroism of the singular white male outcast savior. Eco-punk involves acknowledging the complex ensemble of bodies, images, data, infrastructures, yet refusing to hold any of the objects of study in our hand, mind, or eye just as object of study. So it's a form of kind of lived praxis. As part of this eco-punk mode of working, I attempt to think both with texts and images. And this is the kind of recent work which has been shown in different ways, including on kind of light boxes called Planetary Exhalation. And it responds to a certain suspicion I'm feeling these days about the turn to the concept of the planet on the part of many theories, especially many male theories, who suddenly found themselves with this huge object to kind of play with, all the kind of Latourian reworking of the engagement with the world through the planet. So I'm kind of trying to find a different entry point to planetarity. So my working with images in the context of the contemporary eco crises involves an attempt not just to diagnose the set crises, but also to reimagine the world in which they unfold. I'm mindful here of art historian John Tresh's argument that how we live on Earth is closely tied to how we address the immensely difficult task of picturing the universe. In our efforts to understand, manage, and counter the eco-eco crisis, it is therefore important to question how we see our planet. That is, how it arrives to us as an image, and how specific images of planetary and planetarity shape our imagination and ideas. So how can we observe the diverse conditions, multiple architectures, and ongoing transformations of planet Earth while realizing that the apocalypse and the Anthropocene is, of course, not distributed equally? How can we envisage a different model of our habitat while questioning the whole notion of it being ours? What vantage point should we adopt in the process, and how does gender fit into that framework? The 2019 issue of Architectural Design, edited by Liam Young and outlining the notion of architectures of the post-Anthropocene, is one attempt to approach this problem, illustrated with elegantly crisp photographs of architecture without people. It demonstrates the recent emergence of landscapes made by or for machines, featuring data centers, giant distribution warehouses, telecom infrastructures, and industrialized agriculture lots. And I think it's very interesting that, to be talking about this in Bikoka and being actually on the ground with that kind of post-industrial landscape, which is also a lived landscape, and being here when it becomes a space of learning, for example, a space of art, and not just this kind of view from the sky. So many of the images in that special issue that I'm showing you had been created with the help of drone camera technology, flattened perspective, and CGI, resulting in an oddly detached picture of the world. You could describe it as a media-clean world. Even if this new world looks distinctly post-human, the all-conquering visual apparatus used to conjure it has ended up elevating man as the creator and destroyer of worlds. So in response to this cleansed vision of the world in crisis, I have mobilized my eco-punk sensibility to develop an alternative planetary vision. This was undertaken as part of a project I have called Feminist with a Drone. Presented in the form of field notes, it mobilized drone technology currently used in amateur drone videos from beautiful locations in the world, coupled with GoPro Hero cameras. What I wanted to do was enact a less masterful, less heroic, and less domineering viewpoint, one that doesn't flatten the world into a postcard or a diagram. So you can think of it as an art piece, but you can think of it as well as feminist philosophy by another means. So here are my field notes. On December 12, 2020, I purchased a Rice Tello drone. Designed by industry giant DJI, this mini drone, marketed as the most fun drone ever, is aimed at teaching kids and adults how awesome flying can be. The exploration of this awesomeness was the key goal of my fieldwork. My first outing with a Tello took place on the 24th of December 2020 in a small park in a residential area of southwest London. During the flight times of up to 13 minutes, I captured a sequence of still and moving images from the height of between 2 and 10 meters. The experiment came to a halt when the drone flew away on descent. The follow-up search didn't yield any results. The situation compounded by unpropitious weather conditions and approaching dusk, with the drone then considered lost. The following day, the drone was located in a different part of the park. The experiment in testing the drone's awesomeness was resumed the following week. Some images were taken during the first flight. On its second ascent, the drone lost one of its propellers, with the propeller itself becoming lost among the park's vegetation. A replacement propeller was installed, but this made the drone inoperative, with the device losing the capacity to fully lift off the ground. This concluded my attempt to fly the drone and the take images with it. Loss was a key characteristic of my experience with the Rice Tello. Now, so could things have gone any worse for me? Was the fieldwork conducted as part of my project a failure? Crucially, should I have bought a better, more manly, and more high-tech drone? In the spirit of feminist bricolage, an approach would remain aware of power relations while foregrounding the practices of shaping, crafting, and producing that academics usually hide and often hide behind in the production of beautiful and polished surfaces unpunctured by doubts, hesitations, and incompletion. That's a quote from Rachel Handforth and Carol Taylor. I decided to repurpose my losses. The limited sample of images obtained from the drone's camera and their relatively low quality, coupled with the loss of the drone's functionality, led to the development of a hypothesis about the possibility of constructing an alternative drone visuality, which I termed loser images. As a feminist rejoinder to the beautifully distanced and hence sanitized views of the post-Anthropocene world offered by Liam Young and others, I propose loser images as a figuration that channels some of the potential of the multi-perspectival, humanic worldview without falling from its grandeur of scale. Figurations such as the cyborg, the modest witness, or nomadic subject used in the work of feminist thinkers of technology such as Donna Haraway or Rosie Braidotti, who are of course dear to many of the speakers at this conference, are thought devices aimed at shaping a different political imaginary or performing an alternative image of the future. My loser images figuration is meant to serve as an alternative form of post-Anthropocene visuality, one that doesn't sanitize the world while excising its inhabitants of different scales from the picture. Instead, it envisages a more porous planetscape and a more entangled and messy ecology. My minor intervention into the grand problem of the multiple planetary crises has an affinity with geographer Heather McLean's praise of chaotic research pathways. McLean offers her chaotic methodology by way of a feminist response to planetary urbanization. She points out that there is something both totalizing and limiting about the planetary approach many theorists offer today, in that it privileges a lineage of particular white, male, and European Marxist and neo-Marxist political economists at the expense of feminist, queer, and anti-colonial contributions to the subfield. It also positions researchers as pre-constituted and monadic entities, not as living, breathing beings emerging as part of their work, praxis, or struggle. This is precisely the problem I aim to raise in much of my work, by way of challenging many theorists of planetarity who merely float above and around their object of study without getting their lungs and hands dirty. My loser images go beyond the perfect planetarity and planetary vision of the drone eye, but they also transcend the airy planetarity of much of contemporary theory, which seems to have forgotten about partial views, inhabitation, and an alterity that makes a difference. Conceptually, Feminist with a Drone engages humor, irony, and partiality as feminist methods for conducting work in technoscience and technoculture. Those modes of affectively remodulating the traditional framework of what counts as knowledge and scholarship proper open up alternative ways of seeing and doing. McLean also works in this vein, for example, with her drag king performance at a cabaret called Fail Better, a Glasgow space featuring artists of color, queer and working class artists, adopting a drag king persona of an urban think tank expert, Toby Sharp, promoting tools for urban change as part of the Creative Cities agenda. She engaged feminist critique not only in her scholarly research, but also in her cabaret act. Creative urban communities are therefore not just treated by her as objects of study, they become research partners. From a planetary standpoint, promoted by theories such as, say, Bruno Latour or even Dipesh Chakrabarti, activities such as those taking place at the Fail Better cabaret could perhaps be positioned as, at best, ineffective. McLean fears that through a lens preoccupied with mapping flows of capital, local sites of activism can end up looking as weak and useless in the face of steamroller-like neoliberal policies. I share McLean's concerns. Yet, like her, I believe there is too much at stake to just give up, especially as the accusation of weakness is itself a gendered strategy aimed at renormalizing the militant, heroic, and victorious ways of acting, be it as knowledge producer, political actor, or artist. Polish philosopher Ewa Majewska has gone so far as to propose what she's termed the avant-garde of the weak, a mode of working which combines the feminist rejections of patriarchal visions of genius and creativity and emancipatory claims originating in the peripheries, with the demand for an expanded epistemology, one including marginalized and colonized territories in art history and practice. So Feminist with a Drone was therefore designed as a performance of planetarity as a research problem, but it was also already a form of research designed as a performance. My goal was thus to perform the study of planetarity and of the associated disciplines of art history, ethnography, geography, urban studies, architecture, and design with their colonial histories and epistemological exclusions differently. Even though the methods and the tools used, a toy drone, a beach ball, may seem naive and childlike, their underlying ambition to challenge our ongoing planetary foolishness as well as our partial visions are very serious indeed. The loser images figuration produced in the process follows in the footsteps of Haider Steil, whose kin notion of poor images has become an important trope in contemporary critical studies of the image. Steil used the term to describe lossy digital images traversing the networked personal computers of our globe. Their poverty referred to their low quality and low resolution as a result of their incessant replication on ever cheaper media, but it also pointed to the wider condition of cultural disjuncture, where the impoverishment of many image producers and image subjects went hand in hand with the enrichment of those in control of digital infrastructures. My loser images are precisely such poor images of the world, serving as counterpoints to the hashtag amazing drone views of planet Earth. They are a testament to the poor quality of the camera and the limited skills of the operator. There is something not quite right with them as both representations and captures. The worldview they present is out of sync, wobbly, smeary, somehow degraded. Yet those loser images are not just mine. The concept is primarily meant to serve as a viewing, structuring, and archiving device, allowing us to develop a counter-visuality from what is already there. In her article, Online Weak and Poor Images on Contemporary Visual Politics, Teresa Stejskalova has made an appeal to make use of online images in a way that presents a challenge to the mass image, profit-driven network platform, and to seek oppositional agency for images posted on social platforms. In this spirit, and I'm just going to explain what these are now and how I've made them. So in this spirit, I have mined, with the help of the deep learning similarity algorithm of the visual search engine, Same Energy, which is basically like Google's search by image, but more look and mood-based. And it scours millions of images from Reddit, Instagram, and Pinterest with a view to developing visual affinities. And it did that, seeking affinities with my own failed images. So in all of these, the first one in the top left-hand corner is mine, and all the others are these affinity images taken, using that engine from the web. So the grids obtained transcend both the modernist elegance of Bernd and Hela Becher's industrial typologies and the colorful seamlessness of amazing drone posts of Instagram flows to inaugurate an open-ended, noisy archive from which a different picture of the world can emerge. Loser images embrace their machinic heritage, but they also take on board the inevitable failures of human bodies and machinic infrastructures. As part of their weak feminist efficacy, they show up the dominant perception machine that we all inhabit as structurally and politically broken. Channeling the politic of Sarah Sharma's feminist manifesto for the broken machine, Another powerful feminist figuration whereby feminists are rendered the faulty aberration in a long line of otherwise efficient technologies that have been designed for caretaking and reciprocating love in a male-dominated world. Loser images challenge the macho heroism of the masterful drone eye. Offering a fragile yet tender look, loser images differ from ruin porn, that is the aestheticization of loss, decay, and poverty, which is part of the dominant Anthropocene visuality. They restage planetarity as a call for help, enacting the collective exhaustion of humans, machines, and the environment. Loser images are therefore unproductive because they work against the logic of planetary extractivism, the depletion of natural and human resources, planetary management via technological improvement. They challenge the seemingly inevitable upgrade culture of machines and humans, not just in an aesthetic gesture, but also in an attempt to make a difference. To speak in defense of the poor image of the world is to mobilize an ethical injunction to see the world better and make better things in it. It's an injunction to look around and askew, to look obliquely, to work against the limitations of the image, and to know that the picture is always partial. My loser images also challenge the heroism of the drone eye and the GoPro Hero camera. Offering a fragile look, they are kind of opening towards something different. So again, why am I doing this? Working across theory and practice, text and images, humans and machines, as part of my feminist eco-punk project, entails for me opening up to other sensibilities, including machine thinking and machine sensing. I don't believe that computers, machines, algorithms are incompatible with a progressive feminist agenda, although in their current incarnations, fueled by the technicist and financial illogic of the big tech, they are often explicitly anti-feminist, as well as being racist, classist, and otherwise harmful. But things don't have to be this way. The last work of mine I want to talk about today was an attempt to enact emancipatory agency from within the algorithmically driven complex. Using machine learning and GAN networks to rework the best-known photofilm, Chris Marker's post-apocalyptic La Jetée, I have explored the possibility of creatively engaging automation to outline a different vision of the future, beyond traditional punk nihilism, conservative denialism, and other forms of political or existential despair. As part of this experiment, I have engaged with ways of genderqueering the macho-heroical white savior narrative that is typically offered as a dominant response to world crises, including by Marker himself in La Jetée. I don't know if people are familiar with La Jetée. It's a kind of big thing when you are into film studies or photography theory or French avant-garde. And it's a kind of film that many of us have an ambiguous relationship to it, because on the one hand, a lot of people have grown up loving it, and then at some point you realize that it's a very male, macho, white savior film that is a problem not just in itself, but in offering a particular vision of cultural salvation. So I decided to kind of do a feminist hack of that with the help of AI. Marker's film serves as an ideal case study. It was made in 1962. It's a photo film, 30 minutes. It's an ideal case study for probing the question of thinking about responses to the end of the world with the machine and not against it, because of the knowing embrace of the idea of automatic creation by Marker himself. The director confessed that his photo film had been made like a piece of automatic writing. It was in the editing that the pieces of the puzzle came together. And it wasn't me who designed the puzzle, he said. Now, I have to admit I love La Jetée, but I don't love it enough not to want to break it. So indeed, for me, La Jetée demands a feminist response precisely because of its framing through the male white savior narrative dressed up as an art house gesture. The film opens with a slow pan over a photograph, of an open-air viewing platform, a jetty, at the Orly airport in Paris. A short sequence of closely cut images later, including some close-ups of a white blonde woman gazing tenderly into the frame, touching her face, then grabbing it, her hair tousled in the wind, we are told by a deadpan narrator that something violent has just occurred. The sequence of images is accompanied by a mysterious-sounding opening line. This is the story of a man marked by an image from his childhood. When we then encounter the said man several years later in Paris, which in the meantime had been destroyed by World War III, and again in the current kind of political crisis of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the threat of kind of nuclear disaster once again, that seems quite weirdly timely. Radioactive contamination has pushed all the survivors underground. The man is imprisoned in a medical facility run by an army of German-speaking experimenters with an ominous-looking director at its head. Chosen for his ability to recall strong mental images, the man is being primed for time travel. He will need to go into the future to save humanity. But once he becomes a hero, he is no longer needed by the experimenters. He's pleased to be reunited with a woman of, or perhaps from his dreams, falling on deaf ears. He knows he will have to be eliminated. We then realize, together with him, that the opening scene in which he ended up running towards the woman was the moment of his death. So La Jetées' post-apocalyptic tenor and its haunting narrative make it an apt reference point for the current moment of the multiple crises in which our world finds itself now. The COVID-19 pandemic, with its multiple waves and its unequal distribution of mortality and health, is reminiscent of the time loops enacted in La Jetée, whereby the past cuts across the present to leap into the future and then back again. The renewed threat of World War III generates a similar sense of anxiety. The premonition of an imminent end to the liberal fantasy of our ways of life, because gas, coupled with a desire for things to return quickly to how they once were, fuel the imagination of not only climate change deniers, anti-vaxxers and racists, but also many others who carry a strong mental image of a better yesteryear, even if that image was just a dream. The climate crisis and the premonition of the extinction of multiple species, including our own, and the total destruction of our habitat, make some reach for planetary escapism, packaged as a solution to the depletion of the Earth's resources. Like Marcus' time traveler, whose task was to summon the past and future to the aid of the present, our self-appointed billionaire saviors, such as Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Richard Branson, see abandoning planet Earth as the only exit strategy from the environmental disaster. Our tech-bro planetary travelers lack the anonymity of Marcus' leading character, and they are not hamstrung by the powers that be. Yet the tech entrepreneurs share with Marcus' lead the premonition of an impending tragedy. They are also bound to fail. In their planetary endeavors, Elon Musk and other tech billionaires represent a collective failure of a particular masculinist story of self-interested self-rescue repackaged as salvation. They also symbolize a crash of a particular form of hyper-capitalism whose only long-term outcome can be multiple deaths of economy, society, the Earth systems. We could therefore suggest that in the times of the climate crisis, La Jetée has returned to haunt us all today, sweeping us into its time loops while making us witness our own death, without being fully aware of what we are actually seeing. Now, my own experiment consisted in making a 9-minute film called A Gift of the World, Oedipus on the Jetty, by way of an AI remediation of La Jetée through the socio-political concerns of the present moment in the face of an apocalyptic crisis. The first step involved training a GAN model called StyleGAN2 on database of stills images extracted from La Jetée. And I'll just play you a clip. Takes a while.
This is the story of a man marked by an image from his childhood. He was the son of a Roman Catholic father and a Catholic mother. His mother was an itinerant widow, and he had a sister who was a British officer. He had no family and was just a man. thought of the woman as a baby. He was already a soldier, a member of the Great Army. Now he had lost all his memories. He had lost all the strength he had. He had lost his identity. When he recovers from his trance, the woman is gone, and his mother is gone. He feels the thoughts and feelings of his world, in a world where he is dead. She is, in fact, a gift of the world. A dreamer, a man, she says, a man who will love you. I'll follow you to the end of your life. You will be my first gift, and I will take you from here. I will have you with me forever, and I will never forget you.
Okay, so I'll just explain, because it probably doesn't make much sense in a clip like this, but I'll explain what happened there. So the script was created with the assistance of GPT-2, which is an unsupervised AI language model that had been trained on the web text dataset containing millions of web pages. So basically, I mean, there's a whole technical explanation. We can talk during the break about this. Some people might know how this works. My input was very small. I started by feeding the model La Jette's famous opening line. This is the story of a man marked by an image from his childhood. And then all the Roman Catholic madness that appeared at the beginning, it's all the AI. But it's not the AI, it's the collective unconscious of the internet, taken from blogs, from hate speech, from left-wing, right-wing newspapers, from whatever is available. So, and any edits, so it kind of produced a script for me. Any edits I did to the script were minor, with some of the language errors identified as important moments in my experiment and hence retained. The editing of the video was intuitive, almost dreamlike. So interestingly, the images themselves produced by an algorithm that tried to remake Marcus' film by picking up its key visual features, and especially those pertaining to humans, as is often the case in such generative programs that had been trained on photos of human faces, manifested various body parts, frequently multiplied: noses, hair, eyes, kidneys, kidney-like eyes. Developers frequently resort to the metaphor of a dream to describe the working of the neural nets. Their operations are presented as being akin to what human minds do while being at rest, either when we are asleep or daydreaming. By anthropomorphizing their products, engineers and the technology companies they work for absolve themselves of the responsibility for their programming decisions and their unintended consequences. So I wanted to hijack that method and narrative to redream our post-apocalyptic culture's dominant gender script. And the gender aspect of Marcus' film, but also of the wider cultural script with regard to family dynamics and individual heroism as played out in narratives of distraction, rescue, and salvation in the Judeo-Christian culture, had always troubled me. Griselda Pollock has described La Jetée as a deeply fetishistic, psychically masculine film. She identifies the close-up image of the woman's face as the structuring fetish of Marcus' story, bearing the dual role of the screen and hence disavowal, protecting the hero against pain and death, and of commemoration, pointing out to the overdetermination of the close-up as a vehicle for the cinematic inscription of the feminine. Pollock has analyzed the intricacies of the Oedipal drama unfolding both in La Jetée and in our wider image culture in rather critical terms. She said, the image of the feminine as desired and remote, as looking back across a space that cinema deludes us by compressing through the mechanics of the zoom. The close-up holds something before us visually that is saturated with affect, and yet is the very face of the traumatic. It's an imaginary screen, holding its double burden of allure and dread in carefully calculated formulations of the feminine as face. The woman on an S-screen is positioned to replace the horror of the apocalypse, be it of individual or generational death, or even species extinction, with a benevolent, Madonna-like smile. She is both the lost object of a safe home from before time and a fantasized future of a happy return. Yet Pollock also identifies a countercurrent of Marcus' film that allows for it to be watched and seen beyond the masculine, beyond the castrating eye of the director, and the feminine fetish of the main hero. She locates the countercurrent in the aesthetics of the film as a way of opening up another pleasure and another form of touch. Pollock then goes on to investigate the possibility of viewing the film beyond the heterosexual masculine fetish trapped in the Oedipal drama, asking what the woman's face and gaze would mean to a subject who inscribes themselves differently into the gender matrix. What if the death drive didn't lead us back through the screen of the feminine to a trauma premised on the either-or, life or death, she ponders. Pollock finds the promise of a different matrix of gender and pleasure in the very fact that La Jetée will go on being shown over and over again. It can repeat, and we, its witnesses, do not die. It becomes its own experiential site. The film can also be recut, remained, and redreamed, as I have attempted to do in my experiment. So interestingly, the model, the AI model, tried to remain faithful to the spirit and sense of Marcus' opening line by reenacting the personal and global apocalypse as an Oedipal drama. So you'll have this man, you still have a mummy, still all these things are happening. But something interesting happens. You could see that the film dreamt itself as a feminist genderqueer intervention into the heteronormative fetishism of the apocalypse as dreamt up in key Western cultural texts. The man says in one sentence, "She is my mother." Then he said, "I have no family." Then she becomes he, woman becomes man. Or the gender, the pronouns go really crazy. You know, some would interpret it as technical glitches. I see it as kind of promises, openings within the kind of narrative taken from the global unconscious. What starts as a conversation between mother and son ends up through a series of algorithmic glitches as a sequence of slippages that enter a gender vortex in which man becomes woman, mother becomes father, he becomes she. With the dissolution of the nuclear family, the Oedipal drama as the structuring device of our cultural script disappears. The white woman face disappears as well. She enters a vortex, something happens there. Of course, the algorithm itself is not free from the kind of racialization and the wider practices and process of exclusion that have been well documented over recent years by many scholars. But there is a certain opening. The sense of premonition still lingers, but it's now accompanied by the possibility of an opening and a liberation. This possibility can be read as a feminist gift, a gift of what gender can be thought to be if we emerge from the exclusivity of the Oedipal logic of the phallus as the only arbiter of psychic life and signification. So let me just bring this to a close. To sum up, my way of dealing with the multiple crises of the world, now reconfigured as a planet, is to go beyond the individualism of the me theorist or me artist. It's to go beyond neoliberal incarnations of what Foucault criticized as the entrepreneur of the self, that at the end of the day only aggrandizes himself instead of trying to offer anything socially meaningful and ethically sound. Indeed, like a war, a crisis can also be an opportunity for a cynical scholar. So I'm trying to not to fall into this trap. In the media ecology of feminist eco-punk I've tried to sketch out for you today, the hero's name is Legion, and they may not even be just human. This mode of practice opens up a traditional cyberpunk ethos to the plurality of voices, bodies, sensibilities, and sensations. The concept of eco-punk encapsulates this very spirit of more than one, a community of confluences and contaminations that goes beyond the experience of a disaffected loner from outside the cultural mainstream, fighting totalitarian corporations with his wit and kit. Eco-punk in its feminist guise reverberates with a multiplicity of actors, human and non-human ones, who are at work in the system. The recognition of this plural and entangled ontology of our ecologies, of its situatedness, locatedness, the place that matters, places which are always media ecologies, is a first step towards outlining contours of an eco-punk ethos which has progressive ramifications. Feminist eco-punk recognizes not only the benefits of living with advanced technology, but also the fact that humans are originarily technical beings, that we have emerged and evolved with and via diverse objects and practices such as plows, fire, wheels, agriculture, cooking, and transportation. A mode of breaking out of the echo chamber of the conventional responses to the Anthropocene that remain rooted in affects such as gloom and doom. Eco-punk sees the world as always already media dirty, embroiled, entangled, enmeshed. Yet dirt is not positioned here as something to be overcome for a civilization to take place and hold together. It's rather seen as our civilization's constitutive element. Dirt is also a reminder of the remainder, and a conduit of mediation. Eco-punk therefore becomes a mode of acting for those for whom ecology connects via wires and wirelessly to the media infrastructures that organize the world and that shape our position in it. Feminist eco-punk speaks to those who would rather be cyborgs than goddesses, and for whom art-making and world-making function as inevitable technical prostheses for a human embedded in the world and becoming with the world. So this is my proposal for how to manage the end of the world, envisaging and enacting a feminist counter-apocalypse in multiple modes and media. It uses a variety of cultural techniques, of thinking and making, to work through the current infrastructural and conceptual impasses. You can see it as an ongoing performance of what I called in my earlier work a minimal ethics for the Anthropocene. Thank you. I only joined Instagram like very recently, so I'm about 10 years later to the game. So I apologize for this, but I'm just thought, let's give it a try and see what happens.
Thank you very much, Professor Zylinska. So I will maybe allow our audience, so to speak, to process all the images and insights you shared with us. And I will allow that time by spending a couple of words, let's say, of my making sense or making senses of your talk. And maybe in there will be a question, but we'll see when we get there. Okay, first of all, what I found, and I find particularly inspiring of this talk, is how you weave your own artistic media praxis in the academic knowledge production that you're doing. And I think this is something to stress, because I feel that a lot of colleagues and students often struggle to try to find ways in which another form that is not only the academic article way of producing knowledge can happen. So I think in that sense, this is something I'm taking from your talk as another way of producing knowledge. And of course, I'll be very happy if at any point today you want to tell us more about how your photographic work enters into your academic thinking. But most importantly, I found your invocation of feminist eco-punk particularly touching, as I have my own affinities to punk in different ways. And I thought that what is interesting is the way that you have touched on all of these key elements that to me speak of a punk poetics or aesthetics. And I tried to sketch them down all in one side of the page in good chaotic methodology. And I list some of them because I do think to me they help me to make sense of some of the things you talked about. Well, first of all, there is an irony. You didn't talk about irony, but you were doing it. So I guess it's there in that poetics. The non-cleanness, or rather the dirt, the non-sanitized, but also this loser attitude, the messiness, the failures, this being at the periphery or nearby the margin of the streets, the broken machines trying to make do, if we think with the punk music as well, with the counterculture, and this kind of anti-heroism, etc. And to me, they wave perfectly well together through the images and the various AI experiments that you do. But then my, I guess, question to all of us, but yeah, you have the stage, so maybe you can start answering. How do we go, or how do you see, and I think that's where you ended with your talk, from this poetics, aesthetics, and how it comes to an ethics, to a counter-apocalypse, and as you have also pointed out, previous work, and what kind of politics, and specifically I'm thinking of what kind of collectivities. You spoke very strongly and clearly about to go against, or at least beyond, the neoliberal individualism that is both in white saviorism, in punk culture, as well as in Elon Musk's and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But then what are the collectivities that you envision in this process?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for this. So maybe I'll start from the collectivities, and then I'll talk a little bit more about, how I ended up doing what I'm doing. So in terms of collectivities, and I suppose that's why I'm trying to work with this notion of punk, which has a certain trajectory, and it's like with a lot of different groupings. I always wanted to be part of groups, and yet when it comes to being, in a group, you always feel like, why are they not like, why is all this tension? Why is this dissensus? It's better to theorize than to live through it. So it's a way for me to theorize and to live and to think through my own hurt of the difficulty of being a part of a community. So there is a desire to be that, and that community could be anything, could be a subculture, and could be a feminist organization, or could be a political party, it could be a British left, allegiance. That's a very hurtful place to be in as well. So I want all of these, and I do have all of these, but they come, as many of us will know, through all sorts of different groupings, as being riven with tension. There are, of course, pleasures. There is and there is an importance. I think there's no doubt that it is going beyond the individualistic project. So it's almost like maybe my work at this point with what I'm doing here is trying to figure out how to stay in the community, even though sometimes it's tough, and how to not give up on that, and maybe how to understand the community or the groupings or the convergence as the kind of organizing unit of not just human societies but other societies, and to just kind of get on. It's also the other reason for doing what I'm trying to do is to develop other affects beyond just mourning and melancholia as a response to I think the only theoretical concept I can think is the fact-upness of the world, I suppose, on so many different levels. And given the political, the economic, the ecological, it's so easy, especially if, when you, of a particular, when you mobilize some sensibilities and sensitivities, it's very easy, as we know as well from today's societies, from younger people, from your students, it's very easy to just go into either mourning or depression or collapse. How do we stop ourselves from just collapsing? And so it's not just the infrastructures or societies that might collapse. How do individuals do that? So those forms of repairing fracture and finding ways of still going on and doing something, and is a way of, and that fragmentation, and also it's a way of seeing these communities as being overlapping, kind of being in and out of them, so working through the commitment. So the drive of this work is more ethical, but it's on the way to doing politics. And for me, kind of ethics has to precede politics in a way, in a kind of philosophically. And how I ended up there was I was kind of doing, scholarly work and already working. I was at Goldsmiths before. At Goldsmiths, anything goes. So I went to an art school at a different university and decided to do an MFA in photography and image making. And I thought I would keep it quiet and not mention it to anyone. And I managed for a while. And I thought I'll just keep my practice separate. And obviously that didn't last. And it all kind of messed up and polluted the way I was writing philosophy and theory as well, for better or for worse. And I suppose I was also wanting to ask questions of what it means to philosophize. Why philosophy? Didn't want an example. Why example was seen as a bad thing? Because sociologists did examples, or cultural studies. And I thought, well, actually, maybe there is something to it, to think through the example, to think through praxis. Praxis, again, is, unless you're a pragmaticist, you shouldn't do. So it was kind of a way of, okay, maybe it's okay to do that. And I still recognize the different affordances of different forms of writing. I still think, rigor philosophical rigor as a way of thinking is still important for me, or any other disciplinary rigor. But I'm trying to kind of get to think with different media, recognizing that language, or human language, is just kind of one medium and one particular affordance. I'm trying to kind of do little hybrids as well with my thinking.
Thank you very much. Probably there will be more questions, and maybe we can hear more about that last part. Yeah, there is a question there. Okay, wait. One, help. Yes, I see you over there as well. I think you were first, and then if somebody can go at the very end, there is people there. And then here back.
Can I go?
Please.
Thank you so much for a very inspiring thought. I think that my question is connected to what you just said. So I would ask you to say more about how do we philosophize with the present, with getting dirty with examples, because I felt the same when I was doing philosophy in a previous life. This incredible tendency to avoid the present. This would be my first small question. And the second would be, I find very inspiring the fact that you insist on the fact that we manage crisis, or we face crisis through the recurring narrative of the male hero savior. We don't have narratives for collective crisis management. And you said yourself, community comes with the census, and this produces despair, depression, the end of hope. How do we create narratives for collective and hopeful crisis management that are that makes sense for lots of people, even through the census?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. How do... Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So let's take the question like there on top, and then we get time for the answer, and then we get you.
Hi. So I wonder if you can fold into your analysis this thought that I have. So in terms of your project on Feminist with a Drone, as you were speaking, I was thinking kind of the genealogy of the drone. And we know that machines have their own particular histories. So as someone who's interested in colonial histories envisioned differently, as you say, how would you fold the history of the drone into your analysis? And I'm speaking here specifically about the drone having been invented as a war machine, as a machine that's out there to kill, that is specifically there to go and find the brown subject by the white empire to shoot them in a very targeted and precise manner. So for me, it's very obviously the way that the drone has been, entered into the economy of leisure and pleasure is absolutely disturbing, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a way, even the description of the drone as some kind of fun activity is very difficult for me to even stomach, because it is, a machine that I see as an empire flying over your head and trying to kill you. So if you could fold that a little bit into specifically your project as a feminist with a drone, how do we reconcile even the idea of a feminist with a drone, given this problematic genealogy? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So maybe I'll start from the drone and then go back to kind of collectivities and philosophy. Absolutely, and I think as part of the bigger project around the drone, I've also been working with an engineer and designer and drawing on work of kind of feminist scholars such as Anna Feigenbaum, who did a lot of work on feminist drones and drones used in particular in mapping protests in Mexico City, and drones used as abortion pill delivering devices. So there's a lot of repurposing of drones. So obviously the technology by itself, I think it's important to acknowledge that history. And in the kind of broader part of bigger part of the project, that kind of countering with the technology, I think is absolutely important. But in some sense, lots of other tools that we are dealing with as part of the modernity have also been, even if not invented, but primarily mobilized for oppressive colonial purposes, including, you could talk about the book, you could talk about the pen. And there are obviously ways of strategies of redeploying them for more progressive things. So basically not losing sight of that, but also recognizing there are already other practices. But it is what is disturbing for me precisely is the illusion of that history from that, fun little flying object. And the fact that there is these flying objects that are also today mobilized in some other form of warfare on societies which are seemingly not at war, where there is a certain, because they are so high and they are delivering so much data and creating other zone conflicts somewhere else. So that horizon is obviously important to counter with and to respond to. So the question of feminist philosophy, well, of philosophy as such, so it started for me as well from when I was writing about kind of photography, and I was trying to do kind of philosophical writings about that. And I was looking at people like Laruelle, for example. And a lot of philosophers writing about photography didn't look at any photographs, but didn't actually mention, didn't include any. Because again, that was this impurity of the example, of the trace. And I was thinking, well, obviously there's something wrong if you are. So if you're writing about clouds, the way Kant was writing about clouds or mountains, it's kind of easy to imagine certain things. And this one mountain equals another mountain, which we, of course, know is not the case. It's just that the limit of the imagination of a particular notion of philosophy that was very location. I mean, Kant just never left Königsberg. So there is that sense of, the limits of my world suddenly become the limits of everyone else's world that I want to kind of open up with this, and obviously drawing on the plethora of work being produced from other disciplines, and the question of collectivity, I think you're absolutely right about saying that the world crisis we find ourselves in, obviously they do demand collective responses. But it's interesting because even around the kind of current war, in kind of Russia's attack on Ukraine, all the responses are still positioned as a theater of powerful men who might deliver some kind of salvation. And in some sense, it's not to, for example, not to castigate necessarily Ukraine for its political or PR response, because it's doing what the current cultural narrative demands of a very particular way of performing it. But there are obviously other ways, and there are lots of people, civic societies involved, lots of different networks are involved, people are participating, and I think it is the only way to do that. And also the younger generations who are coming more as a kind of collectivity. The understanding of gender among young people is completely different. With our students, I'm sure you can experience that as well. They're going less a traumatic thing and more like recognize, well, of course, what were you thinking, you older generations? So hopefully there is that kind of, some of the things that were sites of struggle for us, maybe in other generations, in younger generations, becomes ways of already functioning. But, that battle is not lost, because on the other hand, the whole kind of individualistic narrative of, you need to be, you need to win at something, at Twitter, at the job, at whatever, at exams, doesn't go away. So it's just, finding collectivities that map out alternative futures. In some sense, it's the horizon of extinction, be it extinction of us as a species or our ways of life, is also a certain opportunity to realize, maybe it's always been the case for the majority of people in the majority of places in the world. So suddenly the narrow sliver of population, which is kind of rich white West, finds itself experiencing that as well. So that experience, which is, it's already maybe time to join that community of vulnerability and recognize that, maybe it does call for other ways, because there is no other way.
Two more questions?
Yes, thank you very much for your lecture. I wanted to ask you if you also consider indigenous feminisms and two-spirit theories or artistic practices in your entry to Planetarity. And I'm thinking, for example, and I work in the context of settler Canada, so I was thinking, for example, of how indigenous writers, artists, scholars such as Casey Adams or Joshua Whitehead are, in my view, reimagining temporality, technology, affect from the location of actually having survived genocide, but also living under ongoing colonialisms. So when I was listening to your talk, I kept thinking of the collection Love After the End, an anthology of two-spirit and indigiqueer speculative fiction, where Whitehead says, two-spirit and indigiqueers are the wildest kinds of biopunks, literally and literarily. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts about this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. I remember there was another question here. Okay.
Thank you. Should I give up the...
It's a really quick question, and it may perfectly be that you have addressed it and I haven't, attained it for my level of English. But I was wondering if you could develop a bit more the sense of this repetition of the eco before the punk and what it means in relation to all you have explained it in your very evocative talk. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for an amazing talk. I've been actually following your work and wondering if you're Polish, so I was very...
Tak, jak najbardziej.
A little Polish, did you say?
Tak.
Okay.
Tak, ja mówię po
And
polsku.
thank you, and greetings from Ewa Majewska, whom you cited. But my question is about humor. We all noticed that we laughed, and it's not a happy topic. I'm wondering if you could comment on your use of humor and also your response, and I don't know if you know this film, but it was extremely popular, I think, Don't Look Up, which was, and I thought, a kind of feeble effort at making comedy out of the Anthropocenic situation. And I'm curious if you thought that humor was somehow, in line with your kind of humor. But I'm mostly interested in what makes you laugh, and if it's the same stuff that made us laugh about.
Okay. Thank you. Well, that's such an embarrassment of riches with the questions. Great. I'll start with the kind of indigenous knowledges. So as part of my life, I do a lot of work in Latin America, and I'm very interested in kind of alternative cosmogonies, alternative ways of imagining the world. And so, for example, and that's not a feminist example, but that's an example of, I'm very taken with Eduardo Viveiros de Castro's rereading of Deleuze as a kind of, through alternative cosmogonies and offering another ways of seeing. But also kind of looking at what Colombian or Mexican kind of feminist and queer activists are doing around kind of bodies, and especially the, what's her name, gory capitalism. Yes. So that's a kind of, I think, a very powerful way of narrating local histories, but also linking them to global narratives, taking into account what was happening as part of other ways of imagining relations between bodies. So those influences are important to me, and they are kind of part of some of my work. I've done some work on water and trying to think other ways of being. But I think I have to admit, I'm still kind of learning from those, so obviously I'm kind of coming at them with fascination that there are other ways, and also that links to the question of philosophy. There are other ways of philosophizing, and it's not, and there are smart models of understanding how things are connected, which don't go through kind of Western epistemology. And there are a lot of people doing it very well now, trying to acknowledge that. And then the question about eco-punk. So the term eco comes from a theorist called Tom Cohen, who writes on ecology. He's a philosopher and Deleuzian, and he was talking about eco, referring to a dual crisis, ecological and economic. And thinking that I was probably just blurted it out somewhere in like 3 seconds. So that's, and I've worked with that concept, and I've always acknowledged Tom as a kind of gifting that concept to me, and I've repurposed it a little bit to talk, because obviously even the Anthropocene is not just an ecological disaster, it's also an economic crisis, and everything else we are living to, it's always this eco, and ecologies of which are also media ecologies, so that ecologic and economic, and it works in a number of languages, but doesn't translate so well into all languages. And then a question from Agnieszka about humor and irony. And yes, I love Don't Look Up, I have to say. I know some people really hated it, was stupid. So lots of silly things make me laugh as well. I borrow from, like Haraway, when she thought irony could be good. I said, yeah, exactly. So you can actually do scholarship. So it was such a discovery for me early on, seeing that irony could be a viable mode. And it's partly because I'm thinking, what else? How else do we do certain ways? And obviously the ambition of the work, or the desire, is serious to kind of try and figure things out, but the humor, irony, and other senses and sensibilities are ways of coming to, understand what happens. So yes, and also because I spend quite a lot of time of my academic life in departments of media studies, cultural studies, so, it's kind of looking at a lot of popular culture, and that was okay, so... And so that's where I draw a lot of my pleasures as well as inspirations. I watch a lot of trash TV.
Thank you for generously answering everything. Can you take one last question? Sure. Just one, then we need to wrap up, please.
Thanks a lot. I loved your talk a lot. But please, why would as I understood, that you would embrace the phrase, rather be a cyborg than a gardener?
Why would I rather be a cyborg than a goddess? Well, it's a quote.
No, not a goddess. A gardener, you quoted.
No, a goddess, sorry.
Oh, then I misunderstood.
No, sorry, that's probably my weird accent, so.
Oh, no, my misunderstanding.
The images, okay.
No, it was written on the screen.
I think in the second or third slide, you had an image and there was a quote underneath saying, I'd rather be a cyborg than a gardener.
And then a gardener. Oh, I heard a governess, sorry.
I'm sorry, my
why would I... yes, I know. Yes, that was it was also a kind of engaging a little bit critically. I recognize there is a lot of really interesting work around rewilding and people are doing great things with gardens. It was just my own inside joke with me. So I'm so rubbish at gardens. But I recognize like lots of feminist work. We had a little kind of garden at Goldsmiths, and also gardening is a technical activity, so it's not an opposition. So it's probably just a silly joke, and looking at Namjoon Paik's intervention where he did this TV garden. And so that was like a joke between me and Namjoon Paik, who is dead, so he didn't get the joke. But
okay,
but there's nothing else to it apart from saying that I love Haraway. My way of engaging with gardening is technological. I had my previous garden, I had this huge metal rusted cactus and lots of stones, and my neighbors at first were saying, when will you remove this? When will you have proper plants? But it's just really my lack of skill rather than. So as a gardening, as a practice of doing something interesting, a practice that again is technological, no, nothing against. It's just me, sorry.
Okay. Thank you again, Professor Zylinska. I think we can close the keynote, and thank you so much for this inspiring keynote. We just have a short communication.
Hi everyone. Sorry, just an announcement. If you have 10 seconds.
Just a minute.
We just wanted to let you know that there is an early career workshop this afternoon at 1:30, and we just wanted to clarify the fact that everyone is welcome, every types of student, every range of students, because I've just heard that some have thought that it was only for postdocs. So it's for PhD students, for postdocs, for MA students, for everyone actually. So you are welcome to join us. Thank you.